in order to silence you from discussing a very real issue of, I wouldn't even necessarily say race, I wouldn't even necessarily do the cop-out and just say culture, but voting.
Whoa. Did he just acknowledge that talking about culture is a dog whistle for talking about race? Wait, Wait, that was uncharacteristic honesty. Okay. Cool.
Now, I know you're going to say, hold on, and I want you to comment if you agree that that's what's happening, and I didn't have to mention race once, by the way, let's be really clear.
All the illegal immigration being done by Canadians. He literally already admitted culture is a dog whistle. Yeah, okay.
I'm going to get to the history a little bit of immigration, how this changed dramatically, and why there's a difference when people say, well, we're a country of immigrants. Well, that's true. Immigration up through the 1960s, certainly the 30s, 40s, not at all the same as today.
I thought it was about illegal immigration, but wait, now we're getting to the Hart-Celler Act. Let's find out.
Here's the primary difference. You cannot have open borders and you cannot have mass immigration when you have a social safety net and a welfare culture. It's very, very different.
Yeah. Remember that the biggest immigration waves that ever took place in the United States relative to the proportion of the population we have, I believe it was Germans back in the 1800s. The waves of immigration that we got, like Germans in the 1800s, Italian, Irish, like Poles, all of them together were colossal. They were massive. And they were also accused of draining the budgets of the cities, states, and the country they came into.
And that's where we are right now. When that happens, you've got to close the books, or at least have a guest book. There's a huge difference between legal and illegal immigration. The left tries to act as though we throw it all together.
So wait, why are we talking about illegal immigration when he just said up till the 1960s, which is when the Hart-Celler Act, which only affects legal immigration, was passed? It's like he wants to acknowledge this is a race thing, but then he's going back to the legality thing. Like, the thing that changed in the 60s was the race-based component of immigration laws into the United States.
If you look at the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, these people in Europe who are fleeing wars, people will now say, oh, what happened to, Statue of Liberty? Give us, you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor. Yeah, at that point in time, there was no promise to feed the hungry, no promise to pay the poor from the taxpayer. That's a very different time. It was a very different reason for people migrating to this country, and it is not a scenario today that is tenable when you have people coming in and suckling at the public teat.
Then why is it that the time he said that immigration was different blocked off at the 1960s instead of when Social Security was introduced? That's interesting. If his concern is public spending, then why is it that the threshold that he set was not, in fact, when Social Security, which is by far the largest government like social spending expense today, was introduced, and rather, instead, back when the immigration law that changed the race of people that we could bring in was changed. That's interesting. Oh, and by the way, just because the welfare state as we currently understand it is more of a modern thing, does not mean that immigrants were not a fiscal burden to the areas that they arrived in back before the welfare state was a thing. Like, if you don't think waves of immigrants back in the 1800s were accused of draining the economy, then, well, you should go look that up, because they were, every time. Yeah. Despite making up less than 25% of the New York City population, Irish people made up 55% of those arrested in 1859. Curious.
They wanted to be a part of America. They weren't coming here to get handouts. They were not coming here to this country to break the law. Not saying that everyone
55% arrests in New York City, Irish people. Again, keep in mind, everything that he's saying is different about these modern groups. People like him said about every previous group. They said this about Germans. They said this about Polish people. They said this about Italian people. They said this about Chinese people on the West Coast. They said this about Japanese people and then put them in internment camps. They said this about Poles. They said this about every single group, every single time. There has never been an immigration wave to the United States that was not met with people accusing them of racial inferiority and leeching off the system. Every single time. And yes, the Italians and Irish were way more disposed towards criminality than fucking modern day illegal immigrants. Massively more so. Way more so. Far, far more so than modern day illegal immigrants. Crowder's literally making Charles Murray arguments. I mean, this guy on the right literally just said, and by the way, the people who used to come, they were white. Like, yeah.
They were looking for good jobs. Now here's the thing. A lot of CEOs didn't like that. Because you're talking about immigrants coming in who are skilled, and so they'll want to be paid more.
Yeah.
Right? So there was a bill, Ted Kennedy supported this bill that cut off immigration from what we now know as the EU, opened it up wide to the Pacific Rim countries. Okay? It's called the Hart-Celler Immigration Act of 1965. And they claim it expands civil rights, as far as the movement to immigration and abolishing this national origins quota system. Really what it did is it actually made it nearly impossible for European immigrants to come here with more skills, with more education, because they believed, and why favor people from the Pacific Rim? Because you're talking about people who would come from manufacturing jobs where they were making pennies, go to the United States, and guess what? They were less likely to ask for more. And
so this right here is just explicitly and full-on a lie. The Hart-Celler Act was about allowing people to come into the United States and ending the discriminatory policies against non-white people. That is it. Everything else that he says about it leading to more unskilled immigration or it being an attack on skilled immigration, this is simply a lie. It is just not true. It is incorrect. This is just literally just a way of selling a white ethno-state where you maintain discriminatory immigration policies through like pseudo-Nazwell bullshit. This graph and narrative about Italian black people murdered in Philly is relevant. Hold on. Racial and ethnic trends in imprisonment for murder and voluntary manslaughter. Italians and blacks. Holy shit. And then all others. What the Italian graph measures is in the early years, the arrival of disproportionately male and single immigrants from a region with highest murder rates in Europe, their dispositions unimproved by the ocean voyage, their arsenals upgraded by American weapons. Within a short time, as these people found jobs in the still thriving urban industrial economy of Philadelphia, the graphic decline reflects the way in which they went to school, got married, and settled. Yeah, the big difference between Italian, Irish, and black people. So Irish and Italian people moved to the north when they came in immigration waves. Black people moved up north after slavery ended to work in the factories. And the big difference here is that all groups started out living in slums. They started out living in tenements. They started out very criminal, high rates of murder, beefed with the police constantly, very, very economically unproductive in the sense that they drained a lot from the economy, from the federal expenditure in terms of police expenditures or prisons, But the main difference there is that eventually Irish and Italian people came to be accepted as white, in large part because they reciprocated the racial bias that the majority white population had against black people. So by weaponizing their status of whiteness, they were able to be accepted and given roles and responsibilities that black people didn't. After all, black people were living under Jim Crow laws, Irish and Italian people weren't. So even then, Irish and Italian people, even though they started out with greater criminal elements than black people living in the same tenements, the same rundown portions of New York City or whatever, Irish and Italian people weren't being legally discriminated against, and the social discrimination against them lessened, which gave them an avenue towards what we now consider to be two relatively well-to-do middle-class white European populations in the United States. For black people, that was not the case, and so they remained the underclass, whereas Italians were able to fight their way into the upper class, or at least the middle class, the social middle class.
a lot of you inherently think there's a difference. You go, well, if I look at the Irish and the Italians, sure, we were a country of immigrants, but it feels like there was something different. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. This is basically like us today saying, hey, China
feels like something was different. Oh, guys, just trust your vibes in this one. Something just feels different when immigrants come from non-white countries, huh? It just feels a little bit different. I just don't worry about it.
Like you said, they realized they weren't going to be able to buy the votes of, for example, Italian Americans who came here and started businesses and were paying taxes. They realized that
again, this complete ahistorical myth that Italians just came over to America and started businesses and paid taxes as though they weren't the most disruptive and criminal group in the North for a really long time. Remember earlier, when he mentioned the mafia and he was like, oh yeah, anyway? Remember that earlier? When he was like, oh, well, they did the mafia. But anyway, because, guys, he only likes them because they're white. That's it. That's the only difference. He's essentially admitted it here. He said earlier that culture was just a dog whistle for race, and now he's talking about different cultures.
it's in the Democratic Party's best interest for the immigrants to be illegal. Think about that for a second. That by itself, it's in the best interest of the Republican Party and of the American people for immigrants to be coming here legally. It is absolutely, unequivocally, in the best interest of the Democratic Party for them to enter illegally.
So notice how he's saying this here, in spite of the fact that he was impugning the changes made to legal immigration policy from the 1965 Hart-Celler Act. Illegal immigrants can't vote, Crowder.